Hello, and welcome to episode 60 of 2-Minute Talk Tips. I'm Bill Monroe. This week's tip, always assume your screen is showing. One of the cardinal rules of gun safety is to always assume that any gun you see or handle is loaded. With a PC connected to a screen, apply a similar rule. Always assume that your screen is showing and that anything on your screen, even that stuff that you frequently ignore, is also showing to the audience. Obviously, the consequences of a mistake with your PC aren't as serious or as deadly as those with a firearm, but they can still be embarrassing or potentially expensive if you accidentally reveal the wrong information to a customer, a manager, an employee, or a competitor. You see, when you hook your computer up to the big screen, folks see more than your slides. They see any email that you have open. They see your desktop wallpaper. They see other files that are in your folders as you look for something. They see any upcoming meeting reminders that pop up and that may actually betray the topic of the meeting, which is especially concerning if it's a confidential meeting. They can also see your instant messages. They can see your Facebook page if that's open at work. They can see the resume that you've been editing at work before this meeting. And they can see steamy messages from your spouse or not your spouse that might pop up at an inopportune time. Not all presenting involves PowerPoint. As soon as you opt to show a web browser or demo a different file on your computer, all that stuff can be potentially exposed. So close everything not directly related to your presentation before connecting your PC. And always assume folks can see your screen. Stick around. And after the break, we're going to talk some more about storytelling. Hey, I just got some great news about 2-Minute Talk Tips. Do you have an Amazon Echo, an Alexa device? If so, you can now use the 2-Minute Talk Tips skill and listen to each episode of this podcast on your Echo device. Simply go up to it and say, Alexa, enable 2-Minute Talk Tips. You can also go ahead and enable it from the Alexa app on your phone or tablet or other device. And then from there, you can navigate to whichever episode you want to listen to. You can skip forward or skip backwards within individual episodes. So go ahead and give it a try. And then hop on over to the Alexa app on your mobile device and leave a rating or review for the 2-Minute Talk Tips Alexa skill. So now it's easier than ever to listen to 2-Minute Talk Tips as you take care of other tasks around your house. Welcome back. I was in Starbucks today, and I know most people are thinking, yes, Bill, of course you were in Starbucks today. We just assume that. And yeah, that's probably a pretty safe assumption. They probably get way too much of my money as it is. But I was in the coffee shop, and they were out of the particular reserve coffee that I wanted. I know, big crisis. So the barista apologized and asked me what I wanted to try instead. I asked her for recommendations, and she suggested this new Nicaraguan coffee they'd just gotten in that actually has hints of lime in the flavor. And she really likes it. She commented that she had tasted lemon and orange and vanilla and other notes in all sorts of other coffees, but she had never tasted a hint of lime in a coffee before. She went on to say, I'm from Texas, and in Texas, we have lime flavor in everything. And it really reminds me of that. I commented that, it's amazing how a simple flavor like that can really take you back to a particular time and place growing up. And she said, yeah, that's one of the things I really love about coffee. It's always a great way to start a story. And I thought that was really powerful. Stories have the ability to transport you across time and space to a different era of your life, to a different emotional state. And those stories are out there. Sometimes those stories are just going to be a conversation you happen to have at a coffee shop. Sometimes they're going to be big, momentous things that happen to you. Sometimes they're just going to be little things that you observe in the street, or patterns you see among people, or a particular thing that happens while you're in traffic. Listen for those stories as you go about your day, because they are out there. And when you encounter those stories, when you see something that's just interesting, or a series of events that makes you feel a certain way, write it down or record notes about it. Make those notes. Use your phone to do that. Maybe that means using a notes app. Maybe that means taking a picture of something that's going to remind you of the details of that story. Maybe that means typing it out in Outlook or writing it out in a notebook. But go ahead and collect those stories. Because those stories that you see and that you notice, the reason you notice them is that they connect with you somehow. You're having that emotional response at some level for some reason. You notice the story because the story matters to you. And that means it might matter for one of your presentations or one of your talks in the future. It might help you convey your message to your audience. So keep track of those stories, because it's going to make it so much easier for you to then later on share your stories. And sharing those stories is important because people want to have that connection with you when you're speaking. And that story will help you make that connection with them. It takes it beyond facts and figures. It's those stories that help us build either temporary communities when we're just speaking to an audience briefly that we're not going to see again, or broader, longer-term communities in our organization and beyond. I talk about stories so much because they are so deeply tied to our own human experience. It's how we've shared lessons about life and history going back millennia. If you look at the holy books from any of the major religions, you'll find that they are filled with stories and parables. That's how faith was shared hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago, with a community where not everybody could read and write. And beyond that, it continues today. We teach our children stories and lessons with morals and fables in those stories. So many of the major fairy tales that we tell are about communicating things to kids. If we look at any of the classic Aesop fables, it's not just because those animals are having to work hard or figure out who to trust or do whatever it is they are doing in those stories. It's because we are using those fables and those characters to teach broader lessons to children and adults in our communities. And of course, it's not just the stories that are embedded in books or in our presentations. You know, if we want to see just how important stories are, just look at the movies. And we may think, oh, that's just entertainment. That's no big deal. But if you've got a movie like the new Avengers movie, which on its opening weekend pulled in $250 million, following up on the success of Marvel's other blockbuster this year, Black Panther, which at the time I'm recording this has already brought in $688 million on its way to $1 billion. These are not small incidental things. These are major industries. These are things that millions of Americans are taking their money and handing it over to go sit in a dark room with other members of the community and have a story told to them. Movies are all about the stories we share as a culture. They're the experiences we can talk about with other people in our social or work communities. See, these movies are all about the stories we share as a culture today and what they show us. And it's always been that way. Where I think it gets really interesting, too, is even if you look back at the schlocky teen horror movies of the 80s, how they embraced storytelling. It was more than just blood and gore. They were trying to teach some somewhat puritanical lessons about sex and alcohol and disobedience. Again, reviving the whole idea of what we were trying to do in fables over the centuries. Look at reality TV. It's not about reality. It has nothing to do with reality. The Bachelorette in Paradise is not journalism. It's about crafting a story. It's about putting these people together and having them follow a storyline. And if they don't follow a storyline that's interesting enough, going ahead and taking bits and pieces and putting it together to create the story that you want to tell. All of these things, fables, movies, TV, it's all about making us feel something. These stories touch us more deeply than facts alone ever could. The stories we tell embrace the pathos of the pathos, logos, ethos triad. I'm reminded of the famous Maya Angelou quote, where she says, "I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. But people will never forget how you made them feel." Our audience may forget the facts and figures that we share. They will forget our slides. They may forget our names. But what they will remember is how they felt while listening to us. Whether that's inspired, or confident, or worried, or informed, or grateful, or whatever it is, that's what they take away. And it's the stories we tell that will bring about those feelings within the audience. So, what should you do with this, I suppose, story-related rant that I've gone on this week? First, tell more stories in your presentations. Connect with your audience more deeply. Give them something they can relate to by telling those stories. As you encounter stories in the wild, or even just see things that are kind of interesting to you, make a note. Write them down so that you can draw on those stories in the future when you want to share something with your audience. And of course, your responsibility as a storyteller goes beyond telling stories. It goes to listening to other people's stories as well. Because in addition to hearing and consuming stories, we want others to hear our stories. We want to be acknowledged, to be heard, to be recognized, to make that most human connection, whether it's around a campfire or in a shared movie theater, at a conference room table, in an auditorium, or even just through a podcast. We're all trying to be heard. And when you get the chance, go ahead and try that Starbucks Nicaraguan Reserve. The story about the lime in Texas makes it even more delightful. So that's it for this week. What are your thoughts on storytelling? Go ahead and let us know in the comments at 2minutetalktips.com/stories. Try to find one new story a week that you could potentially use in a talk and make a note of that. If you have an Amazon Echo at home or at work, go up to it and say, "Alexa, enable 2-minute talk tips." And if you want to buy an Amazon Echo, you can support this podcast by simply going to 2minutetalktips.com/echo. Assume your screen is showing every time you connect it to a projector. And as always, don't get best. Get better. Thanks a lot, and I'll talk to you next week.
Two-Minute Talk Tips is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.